It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. President Donald Trump began his week-long tour on Wednesday to drum up support for the proposed changes to the United States tax code. If you recall, the president released his proposals for what he called the biggest individual and business tax cut in American history back in April. Trump's upcoming speeches will be largely devoid of details. However, the proposals that have been released to date do reflect a rather corporate-friendly outlook from his administration. The White House proposals include reducing the tax bracket from 7 to 3 at 10, 25, and 35, and of course repealing of the death tax and repealing of the 3.8% Affordable Care Act on small businesses and slashing the corporate tax rate from 35 to 15. Joining us today to discuss the Trump tax proposals and their implications is Dean Baker. Dean is co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research, and he's the author of Rigged: How the Globalization and the Rules of Modern Economy Were Structured to Make the Rich Richer. Dean, good to have you back.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, Dean, let's first of all clear up whether we've learned anything more, any details of the Trump's administration's tax proposals since the 19-point bullet plan was released back in April.
No, they haven't put out anything today. I mean, he is giving a speech this afternoon, and I was just checking the website to see whether they'd put any specifics up there, and they haven't. My understanding, and I can't say no for sure, is that they plan to let Congress move ahead with it and, just leave their general outline up there and see what Congress comes up with. Kind of what they did with health care. Not that it worked out that well for them, but that seems to be their plan.
So then why is he hitting the road with a campaign about tax cuts?
Well, I think he's trying to round up support for it. Interestingly, he really didn't do that with health care. I don't know whether that would have helped or hurt. But in any case, he really didn't go around the country trying to round up support for the repeal of Obamacare. He does seem to be prepared to do that for taxes. I don't know if this is the first of many visits or this is just a one-off. We'll have to see.
Right. He seems to be in campaign mode all over again. Anyhow, what would the consequences for eliminating the death tax, for example, would be?
Well, let's refer to it as the estate tax. This is something that really just benefits a tiny, tiny percent of people. And it's something we should be very clear on because they always try and say it's not fair for a small business, someone who's worked their whole life and want to pass something on to their kids. Almost no one's in that boat. I mean, the estate tax, you could exempt with very minimal planning $8 million from taxation. So that's quite a small business if you have $8 million or more than $8 million. And just to be clear, this is net. So I've often heard people say, well, a farm could be worth more than $8 million. That's entirely possible, but they owe debt on that. So this is saying after free and clear of any debt. And furthermore, again, something people often get confused on, it's a marginal tax. So let's say you're at $8,100,000. You're paying the tax on the $100,000. And frankly, if you're going to tell me you have $8,100,000 and you have to pay the tax on $100,000, I'm not going to cry for you.
And the other thing out there that is under discussion is the reduction of the tax brackets from 7 to 3. What are the implications of that?
Well, it's a big tax cut for the rich. This is, again, one of the games these people play that I'm sure they all know better. The complexity of the tax code has absolutely zero to do with the number of brackets. At the end of the day, I'm sure I don't do my taxes any different than anyone else does. I look up at the tables, and it says if you earn more than X, you owe, between X and Y, two numbers, you owe this much money. I don't have to know whether that was based on there being one bracket or 1,000 brackets. It's the same thing to me. That has nothing to do with the complexity of the tax code. So when they're pretending they're doing us some favor, reducing the number of brackets from 7 to 3, what they're doing is reducing the tax rate on rich people. And, the calculations from the Tax Policy Center, Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center, it's a tax cut that will average almost $500,000 for people earning more than $1 million a year. They're going to get close to half of the tax break here. So this is about giving money to rich people. The complexity of the tax code is really a non-issue.
Right. And speaking of rich people, corporations being at the top of that, is going to, under Trump's plan, receive a reduction of taxes from 35 to 15, assuming that they are paying 35, where there is a lot of loopholes for. Explain that and what a 15% corporate tax would mean.
Well, they actually do have a good point here in the sense they're not paying 35%. So we have a tax rate of 35%, and they always say, well, that's the highest in the world or one of the highest. I'm not sure it's the absolute highest. And the reality is almost no one actually pays that. So the average tax rate, I haven't seen the latest numbers, but somewhere around 21, 22%, which puts us a little below the average for other wealthy countries. So it's not as though our corporations are particularly overtaxed. What I will say, though, is they get to 21, 22% by a lot of gaming. So if we had a lower rate, I don't mean 15%, but if we had a lower rate, let's say 25%, that they actually paid, that would be a huge benefit because a lot of people get rich by gaming the tax code. Think of Mitt Romney and his private equity guys. A lot of private equity is about gaming the tax code. These people get very rich because they're good at gaming the tax code. So if you could reduce, or, well, you won't eliminate, but if you could substantially reduce the opportunities for gaming, and the cost of that is a lower tax rate, I'd be all for that. So they have a legitimate point there, but clearly they're looking to actually cut the corporate taxes. They're not paying too much in taxes. We need to restructure it, but it's not that they're paying too much. We just need a different structure.
Right. And let's say that Trump and Congress is successful in passing some of these things that they're talking about. What would this mean in terms of the national debt and the reduction of tax income?
Well, this is almost certainly a big cut in the amount of taxes collected, and depending what exactly they put in there, we're talking about losing perhaps somewhere in the order of $1 to $2 trillion a year in tax revenue, which is a huge amount. I mean, so that's a very, very big increase in the government budget deficit. Now, I assume what they ultimately pass won't cost that much revenue, but again, if you take the high end of all these cuts, you can lose an enormous amount of revenue. So basically what that means is a huge increase in the budget deficit, primarily to give tax cuts to the richest people in the country. I don't think most people would think that sounds like a very good idea.
Right. And then finally, Dean, I mean, you look at these issues sitting in Washington quite a bit. What could the government be doing to have a really progressive tax code in this country?
Well, I was mentioning before with the corporate tax, I'd certainly favor restructuring that. I mean, what I actually propose is just require companies to give shares of stock, non-voting shares of stock. I'm not talking about running the company, just make sure the government gets its share. I'd like to see some increase in the individual income tax rate. There's other changes you can make. I won't go into all those, but getting rid of some of the deductions. The other thing that would be really, really great would be a financial transactions tax. That could raise a big chunk of money, but most importantly, that would eliminate a lot of the waste on Wall Street, because a huge amount of what goes on Wall Street in terms of trading, that's not helping the economy one iota. This is just a waste of resources. And again, a lot of people get very rich that way. And, we could argue whether people should get rich or not, or how rich they should get, but it doesn't make sense having people get very rich doing things that are not at all productive for the economy. And that's what we have now.
All right, Dean, we'll be looking out for this this week as President goes around talking about his tax proposal. And we'll be happy to have you back if there's more details unraveled or revealed to us.
Great. Happy to be back.
And thank you for joining us here on the Real News Network.